Sorry, my computer is also being slow. There we go. A reading from 1 John. This is how we know what love is. Christ died for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a sibling in need and yet refuses to help? Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And by this we will know that we are from the truth and will reassure our hearts before them whenever our hearts condemn us. For God is greater than our hearts and knows everything. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have boldness before God, and we receive whatever we ask, because we obey God's commandments and do what pleases them. The commandments are these: that we believe in the name of God's own Jesus Christ, and that we love one another, just as we are told to do. Those who keep these commandments live in God, and God lives in them. We know that God lives in us by the Spirit given to us.
Now hear the gospel. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. A good shepherd would die for the sheep. The hired hand who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because the hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own and my own know me, just as the author knows me and I know God. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, Abba God loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Abba.
In place of an individual reflection tonight, we will have an extended community reflection on the readings and on the events of this past week. Everyone is invited to share their thoughts on the readings or these reflection questions. Let's also put the reflection questions in the chat. Or maybe they're in the Prezi too. Okay, here they are. Our readings speak of our call to love one another and to lay down our lives for one another. In our context today, in the events of this week, what does that mean to you? What does it look like to you? Do you feel scared? Do you feel able and ready? What are the seeds to plant or water in this love?
Go for it, Pratik.
Thank you. The Derek Chauvin trial verdict was such a huge drop of relief in my heart, and a lot of things have been going on in my personal life as well. And moved to a new place, got a new puppy. She is 3 months old. Don't have any furniture in the new place. It doesn't have a kitchen. It only has a microwave and a refrigerator. And working, and I was in between places and transition, and everything that I heard about, like the news, and it was just like crushing my spirit and soul, and to be able to do anything. So um, it is a very, very small step in the direction that we are headed, but it's a very important step as well. And I think, the entire world community needed that drop of relief, and, that hope and that comfort that, finally justice is served. And the monstrosity that, Floyd had to witness, including losing his life, has finally, gotten some end point. At least for um, his soul. So I'm just very grateful for this community, and I feel um, hopeful for the future in a long time. Amidst the pandemic and everything else going on. Um, so I just wanted to, share that, and loved what, President Biden and VP Harris said, and the Floyd law that's going to be reshaped, and we are going to look into, policing and how going forward, what are we going to do about this? The counter of that I was thinking about was, if this had not gone in the direction that it went, the entire United States, I think the entire world would be literally burning right now. And that would not serve any purpose anywhere. I'm also lifting up India, which has got, like, the highest number of COVID cases right now, with the highly concentrated population in a very small um, area and region. And I'm just, lifting up the vaccines and the medical gods of the world and the goddesses to, help us as a world community to see through this.
My thoughts this week have largely been with Darnella Frazier. Darnella Frazier is the 17-year-old young woman who recorded George Floyd's murder. And she was harassed by various law enforcement officers on the scene to stop filming. People on the internet asked, well, why wouldn't you intervene? Why did you just stay there and film it? I can't help but think of what trauma she lived through, bearing witness to such horror, and then using that witness to bring about a potential step in a process that may lead towards justice, or at the very least led toward accountability. I am wondering what it means for me as a white person to love Darnella Frazier. What does it mean for my other fellow white folks to love Darnella Frazier? And for everyone who has had to bear witness to the racial trauma that has infected our country for hundreds of years. Someone, and I can't remember who, preached an Easter sermon about likening Darnella Frazier to Veronica, the woman who stood at the foot of the cross as Jesus was crucified and wiped his face with her veil. I wonder what that did to her and to the other women at the foot of the cross, to see him die like that. I wonder what it would mean for all of us to take death seriously. And I can't say I have any answers, but loving someone in the midst of trauma seems to be the absolute least that those of us who are lucky enough to be as unaffected as humanly possible by this can do. And still, love isn't going to bring George Floyd back. Love isn't going to erase the trauma. But that doesn't mean that the hope of the resurrection doesn't still exist. In fact, in Jesus's resurrected body, his wounds were still there. So I don't know what that translates to, but I think it's a question we could all benefit from pondering.
I really like this reading, and specifically, I know the questions are talking about. We're called to love and to lay down our lives for one another, but it starts off by saying, "Little children, let us love," and I think that like little children, and I think of it in the way of like God being like, you are a child, and children sometimes don't know better, and sometimes they do, and they're still imperfect and messy. So when I see the news and I want to fix everything, and everything seems so big and so scary, obviously this week, with the trial and, is it justice or, to me, I saw it and I was like, all right, everyone saw someone get murdered in HD, and that's it. To me, it just was accountability. And so when I feel all these feelings and wanting to change the world or see a change in the world, reminding myself like little children, like little child, little person that I am, there's some grace in that. And I know you were talking about that hope. But yeah, I just like how when it says little children, it just reminds me that as scary as these things seem, there's others to carry this load. It's we are instructed to do it. It's not just one person that needs to do it. So that is encouraging in a very hard world to know that we're not necessarily all alone.
I'm just reflecting and resonating with something that Dory said about. I think that what makes Jesus's death so notable is that Jesus was in some ways like quite ordinary. That he was like a poor Palestinian Jew trying to live his most liberated life in the midst of the Roman Empire, and then was killed by the state and by a mob, but essentially killed by the state police. And that has become a model for our whole faith, that this is what happens when people live their most liberated divine selves. And George Floyd, I think, is a continuation of that. That George Floyd is a man who was killed by the state and by the state police for just being himself, for nothing else. And I think it's really humbling, and yeah, it's very humbling to know that, like, I think in some ways all of us are called to be ready to do that. That's what I think about this. Like, when God is saying that we have to be ready to lay down our lives, that we are called to do that, but certainly some people are higher risk of experiencing that than others. And that was true in Jesus's time, and it's true in our time as well. And so I'm just really sort of struck by that. And in my own faith have been moving away. I grew up in a Christianity where Jesus was put on a pedestal, that Jesus was the only Son of God, and that you had to believe in Jesus alone to move into the kingdom of heaven. And now my faith has shifted to where I understand that Jesus is in a long line of people who are fighting for liberation. And that Jesus is a Son of God, just as George Floyd was a Son of God. And so I'm just really struck by these texts and the events of this week.